welcome back to the With Joey Beat podcast. Today, Peter Thiel, who we're in the middle of a series on, has a very prominent book called 0 to 1, which I think is a great thing to unpack today, with a lot of his key ideas for innovation and business. I've got about 11, 12 key ideas to actually unpack about it. So we'll shoot straight in. Smitty, Luke, you're cold to this, so that's great. There's a little bit of new ideas. The reason why it is important, in my opinion, education, because education does not exist on a freaking island, of course. Like, it's meant to connect to something in the actual world. And so we don't often ask enough, what is that thing we actually want people to do in the world? All right, let's start from the result and work backwards. So he is pretty qualified, and the ideas stand on their own merit. So think about, what do we actually want in terms of innovation? Okay, so the book came out in 2014. Now, I think a big part of it is, and he's talking in the book, the current economic system we have, so this is the first point, doesn't work too well if we don't have continual economic growth. Now, put a little asterisk on that, because there's a phenomenal book by Jeff Booth called The Price of Tomorrow, which talks about, I don't want to get into economics on this for God's sake, but it talks about how in the future we'll have a deflationary, potentially, economy rather than inflationary, because technology makes things cheaper. Simple idea, right? Amazon makes things cheaper. Google is free, Googling information. Anyway, so I'll put that to one side, because I think the second point is that Thiel, especially in interviews I've seen, is disappointed with our progress with technology. He's disappointed. It's coming from a tech entrepreneurial guy. Most innovation, he says, has been on information technology, right? Especially at the time of the book. I guess that's things like, we've had social networks come out. This was before crypto was really taking off, a lot of software companies, things like that. I think he's saying we're lacking innovation in other areas of society, like genetic research, medicine, and I think things like that. I kind of like this stance, because it always looks to us, wow, things have really grown and progressed, but we're not sensitive. Coming back to Taleb, right? We're not sensitive to how much better we probably should have gone, with the tools we have. Because if you think about the way we're educating people, turning into people who struggle to actually be creative, we actually could and should be going a lot better and faster. So I like this idea. He holds society to a very high, seconded by Joe. Now, third point, I love this one. If technology is doing more with less, if that's the very nature of technology itself, he goes, then education is the most anti-technological aspect of our society today. Right? Does that make sense, Luke? So I think 2 or 3 episodes ago, was saying how price of education in the US as a benchmark gone up 400% since 1980. Quality hasn't changed. It may have even become less relevant. So that's not doing more with less.
Doing the exact opposite of what?
Doing the exact opposit. So he says that education is the least most anti-technological aspect of our society, which is a very powerful insight. All right, so I'll go 4th point into the book. So 0 to 1, you love this, Luke, is a how-to manual for business, but it's not formulaic, which is a paradox in itself. And it's worth discussing because, again, what's the point of education if we're not actually creating people who can innovate? It doesn't seem to be a very good system if that's not an output. So first point, right? I'll go into this concept of 0 to 1 and explain what that actually means in the next couple of points. But 0 is that you've got nothing, right? 1 is you've got something and it's happened once. And then obviously you got 2, 3, 4, etc. So the point he makes, science starts at 2. So Luke, I'll get you live on this, making a fool of yourself. I'm going to say 2 numbers and you say what comes next in the sequence, right? 2, 4, what comes next?
5, 6.
Mate, 2,
4, 6, 8.
6? Yeah, it's 6 or 8, right?
Yeah.
It's either going up in 2s or it's doubling.
Sure.
All right. But if I go to you, all right, Luke, I'm going to say one number and you say what comes next. All right. It's 17.
18? Or
impossible.
Or double it?
Impossible for you to know because you've got nothing to replicate.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
the nature of a pattern.
Yeah.
There's an interesting way of thinking about why entrepreneurship is important, because science can only start, developing a particular pattern and clarifying it. entrepreneurship normally faces things like a complete zero, complete new, and just deals with the fact that we don't know what we're doing and is a model for that. So again, like Taleb, it's science and that academia is less useful than entrepreneurship for innovation. So like him and Taleb are on the same page there. But obviously, it's the hardest thing. We need the most innovate. We need, from zero is the biggest challenge, but it's the hardest thing to do. Yet it's the thing we educate for least. So he says, if you study Zuckerberg, and he has this idea that all things really happen once. That's why he doesn't believe in formulas in business, especially. Because if you study Zuckerberg, Jobs, Gates, Larry Page, and try to copy them, you would ironically not be learning from them because they all did something once, right? You won't create another of the first social networks, for example. You have to do something different. You have to do something for the first time. So this is the opposite of, this non-risk taking kind of culture we get sometimes, and current mainstream education, which is really pushing everyone to be the same, grading them on the same system and everything like that. And it treats you like an identical batch. It's the opposite of what we need, really, which is nuts. And, we did that in episode 171. It's literally called Education Cannot Be a Mass Product. All right. And that's why, because if you make a mass something for everyone, you're pushing everyone towards the average. And also I'll cite here episode 168. Education caters least for the areas we need most in society. Like it's the worst for innovators and entrepreneurs and thinkers. That's who it's worst for, at the top of the pile anyway. So getting from 0 to 1 is the hard part. 1 to N is way easier. N meaning whatever comes after. So for example, the first customer is the bloody hardest. I can tell you that for sure. I've got personal examples, like in real estate, you want to sell someone's home, but if you have no one you've sold for, everyone you go to looks at you like, how do I know you'll do a good job? Right? If you're any good, why can't you get other people's sales? It's this whole cold start problem, right? In Constant Student, but once you've got one listing, right? If you're selling one person's home, there's a lot more trust. So it's actually way easier to get the second person than it was to get the first. And then it's easier to get the third than it was the second or the first. Does that make sense? And even with Constant Student, Liam and I spent like 2-3 months planning the first little version of Constant Student. And then we actually just did a test cohort of 26 people and we completely changed the whole thing. Because once you're working with people, it just changes the whole proposition. When you don't have customer feedback, but you've got an idea, you're kind of working in this little bubble land, this little submarine and your own world, and you get lost in your own perspective. So, that's why 0 to 1 is so hard. Once you've got something, you can work with that way easier. But the challenge is getting from 0 to 1. That's the first challenge. So experiment, right?